where someone is told, here, go get this degree. Well, now that they've got this degree, they go get this career in that degree. Now that they've got that career, they climb the ladder. And then in their 30s, they say, why am I not happy? None of this makes me happy. I'm burned out, all this kind of stuff. My personal life is a wreck, but I did everything I was supposed to.
You mentioned, I want to talk through something too, because you mentioned this, and I think this is really vital. Society, we're talking about, occupational wellness here. I think is really it stems into all these other categories, which everybody on the show that comes on recognizing that they're all interconnected. So mental wellness is a big piece of this. Vocational wellness, financial wellness comes into play. But really the heart of kind of your work seems to be occupational wellness. And you mentioned this idea of people are still going to work. They may not be going to church or to family gatherings or to friendly social connections, but they're going to work. And I love that, because what we're really talking about is we're building communities. And one of the things I try to work with my clients is not getting so identified in your job as a business owner or a VP or an executive director that you forget that you have other roles in your life that you can fulfill. And so I love to talk a little bit more about this idea of the lack of community that we're seeing in society and how it's playing its part in overburdening us in our workplace. Can you speak to that just a little bit more in terms of, how we're starting to see a lowering of people going to church or going to these other communities where they're filling their cups for their spiritual wellness or their mental wellness, and how it's maybe burdening us in our occupational wellness?
Here's what the thing is, we talk often about maladaptive coping skills being, substance abuse or gambling or something like that, anger issues. We don't talk about maladaptive coping skill of being a workaholic. And I would make the argument that being a workaholic is an extremely insidious addiction that, to your point, creates that identity fragility. And it is it's just a killer in terms of physicality, right? So we know nervous system dysregulation is occurring, gastrointestinal issues are happening, neurodegenerative, because we're now starting to see that lymphatic system not being able to clean out at night, contributing to plaque buildup, contributing now, studies are showing that there's a direct correlation with Alzheimer's. So that burning the midnight oil, that first one in, last one out mentality, all that crap, right, is killing people. And it's taking years off of their lives. And what's awful about this, and here's what I think this really started, because I am a recovering formerly ambitious person. And so I am preaching right now to my people. I hope they're listening, because when you think about K through 12, we always were taught, if I do this, then this will occur. So if X, Y will occur. If I work hard enough, I will get the outcome. And we got rewarded when we worked really hard. And if we didn't get rewarded, well, that meant we simply didn't work hard enough. So what we were going to go do, we were going to work harder. And we kept working harder and harder and harder. And we kept collecting all these accolades along the way. And every time we didn't win that accolade, we started to think, well, it's something about me. I clearly didn't do a good enough job. I didn't put forth enough effort. I should have done this. And we really get ourselves into this negative toxicity. And so sadly, we are seeing a ton of people, majority of my clients right now, in their really about their early 30s. Well, I've started to see some right now in their early 30s, which is kind of creeping me out, because they were about the mid 30s into the mid 40s range. So the kind of millennial Gen Z, breakdown, but we're starting to see it happening even earlier now, where someone is told, here, go get this degree. Well, now that they've got this degree, they go get this career in that degree. Now that they've got that career, they climb the ladder. And then in their 30s, they say, why am I not happy? None of this makes me happy. I'm burned out, all this kind of stuff. My personal life is a wreck, but I did everything I was supposed to. I did all the X's. Why am I not getting the Y? And I'm seeing, I am a perfect example of it. I have dear friends of mine. I have clients of mine who've all done the same. Take hard pivots, completely upend our lives, quit our careers, change our lives completely and move in a different direction. High risk averse. Because in many ways, I think it's kind of a leftover rebellion that didn't happen previously, right? There was a lot of rule following, and then when that didn't work, see this like really hard turn. So it's interesting. So last year, the last 7 surgeon generals came together and said, we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country. And it's actually been going on globally, and that was prior to the pandemic, although the pandemic didn't help it. Harvard Business Review just this week released their quarterly magazine, and that's on the cover of the magazine where it says, "We're still lonely at work. Let's figure out why." I'm like, because we haven't talked about the real stuff, right? Because again, it goes back to what I was just saying. We're not having these authentic conversations about why people are feeling the way that they are at work. And we aren't seeing a lot of vulnerability. There is a lot of that, just leave it at the door. Nobody wants to hear your problems, blah, blah, blah. And we're starting to break through it, I think, but it's slow going. What's been interesting is when I've had these types of conversations with different generations, I have had all of it. It seems to resonate. The pressure to perform seems to resonate the most with Gen Zs and millennials. But I see a breath of fresh air with Gen Xers of like, finally, someone's listening to us. And then the boomers, I actually see tears because they say, I didn't realize what I didn't know. I didn't realize that it didn't have to be this. We could have done it differently. And so I see a hunger for change, a hunger for community, a hunger for connection. The problem right now is there's not a lot of people stepping into the gap to create that.
Yeah. So I teach at a university, and I have students. So I get a good view of the up and coming generations and how they look and how they feel and what they're thinking. Right. Obviously, we all have our own unique stories and our unique experiences to share. But one of the things I had them do the other day was this practice of, we were talking about just people we're grateful for and connections. And so I actually had them have a practice of getting on their phones, and I let them choose to. I don't make them do anything on their phones. It's not really my style. But I said, hey, look, if we talked about I always do a check-in, and in that check-in, I ask them, to think of something good in their day, 3 what went wells, like Martin Seligman from the father of positive psychology. He likes that practice. But one of them was, who are we grateful for? And so we talked about the person that they're grateful for and why they're grateful for them. And then I said at the end of it, hey, just grab your phone out. And if you want to, send that person a text and let them know that you're grateful for them. Let them know that you appreciate them in their life. And I kind of got this from a guy, Walter Green, who founded Say It Now. And he was at a funeral, and there was an individual who was being talked about. People were just praising this individual who had just passed and all the wonderful things about them. And all Walter Green could think was, I wonder how this person would have felt if we said this to them when they were alive. And so the sentiment is, don't wait until later, say it now. And so I always picture, I bring this up because you're mentioning this idea of, not being vulnerable, not sharing, and being lonely. You could be in a room right now, because it's different than being alone. We're not alone, we're lonely. You can be in a room of 30 people and be lonely. And so I try to help my students realize this, and anybody, like, imagine, everybody sitting in a room with their arms crossed and pouting and going, why won't anybody reach out to me and tell me how much they love me? And it's like, imagine that, like a room of 30 people just sitting there waiting for somebody else to say it. And then imagine a room of 30 people that just go around and saying, hey, I appreciate you because of this. Hey, I appreciate you because of this. And it's that idea of, if we want it to happen, and this is my personal opinion, one of the first things we have to do is take the first step and just say, what can I say to someone else to let them know that I care about them? What can I do? To your point, what can I do to be vulnerable and share, like the leaders were asking to do, with somebody else, that I care about them and that I'm there for them, I'm supportive of them?
I had a lot of early career success. And, in the beginning, that's like people want to champion that. And then after
Mm.
you've had enough, then all of a sudden people are like, the knives kind of come out, right? And that's an isolating thing because they think you're trying to one up them. They think it's a
Mm.
competition. When in reality, for me personally, it was my father was dying of cancer. I was battling health issues. Work was my stability. And
Yeah.
so where people thought, when I was winning the, employee of the month, employee of the year, all these kinds of things, she's just trying to show us up. No, it wasn't. I was just trying to find stability and sanity. And so I kept saying, like, it's not vanity, it's sanity. And
Mm.
sadly for me though, work became like my only healthy coping mechanism. And then it became no longer healthy, right? It was like the thing that, like, I was doing it too much. It was really wearing me down. And I've seen that, and I saw it with my mother. I saw it with my father, who battled cancer for 3 years, all the way up to 2 weeks before his death. He was still working. Um,
Mm.
I mean, and while he was dying, I was working on my laptop in the room next to him. That's, I mean, as awful as that sounds, I've worked from hospital rooms with a feeding tube in me, all of these types of things. And I got rewarded for it, coach. Like, I kept being
Mm.
told I was resilient and inspirational and all this kind of stuff. So I thought I was doing the right thing. And I had these friends kind of gently nudging me, being like, have you talked to a therapist? And I was like, no, I don't need to. I have work. And
Mm.
sadly, like, I didn't have folks around me at work that were saying, hey, we think you're working too much. We think that, maybe you should rebalance the things in your lives. Because again, I was getting a lot more added to my plate. And that's the thing that I see in companies, right? Is nobody says, hey coach, you did such a fantastic job. You hit all your metrics. As a reward, next quarter, let's dial it back 20%. Like, they never say that, right? The goalposts are always moving, so you just have to keep working harder
Mhm.
and harder. And if you came out of the gate too hot, holy crap, what if you peaked too soon? The stress is ridiculous, right? Like, we lose it. And so this, I think, is why we are seeing these levels of loneliness, is because then it flips over into that dorsal vagal tone, right? Where people then are just shut down. They're no longer in that fight or flight. They are now in that freeze mode, and they are just doing the best they can. And it's so horrific to me to go into companies where I watch good people literally having very lethargic movement and all of this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
They're slow talking, they're slow thinking, everything about them is slow. They're not communicating with each other. And I know what's going on. They have been so dialed up for so long, they've shut down. And
Mhm.
and I know that when they go home, that's the exact same person they are at home. It's people's entire lives we're talking about. It's no longer their livelihoods, it's their lives. That's where I think we have to start really changing that conversation, and understanding if our employees don't look healthy when they're at work, they are not healthy when they go home. That's pretty important for us to recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're touching on there, what we've been talking about, is this idea of like, what are the things we're seeing in people who are not doing so well at work and in their occupational wellness, right? There's sickness involved. And you touched on a lot of physiological endeavors or traits, right? So this idea of lethargy, of burnout, of cognitive decline, of just not being able to think appropriately or as quickly as they used to. Even the high performers, that we typically see, they're slowed down in some capacity. They're still outperforming a lot of other people, but they're slowed down and they're maybe not making the decisions that they used to be able to make. So let's think a little bit more in terms of the symptoms and signs that you're seeing in your clients or you've seen before that let them know. When do they finally start to realize, oh, there's something going on here that I should start to be aware of?
Yeah, good question. So I start to see a lot of light bulbs going off when I talk about getting them to lower their shoulders down. Like, when I say, like, imagine me standing behind you and pushing your shoulders down, you start to see some light bulbs going on, because I'm like, yeah, when you're stressed out, those shoulders tend to go right up around your ears, and you tense it. Yep. And I'm like, so again, you're not doing your best work. We talk about diaphragmatic breathing. We talk about being able to hear our, belly sounds, feeling our belly. And all of those kinds of things. And people start going, oh, okay, cool, cool. But my favorite one is when I say, yeah, how many of you go home and sit in your driveway and scroll through social media for 30 minutes before you go into the house? And people are
Mm.
like, I feel seen. I get that so
Yep.
many times. And I'm like, that's exactly what has just happened, is that you were performing at work. Now you're going home. You're in your safe space, and your vagus nerve just went bloop. You flipped over into that to that dorsal vagal tone, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing unless, like someone like me, it can become pretty extreme, and I go into like, low heart rate, low blood pressure, all of these, everything just slows down like a hibernating bear. Um,
Mm.
and those are the things that, I can talk to people about having GI distress. I have severe Crohn's disease. But even beyond that, like just talking to people about what does that look like when you're stressed out and you're not able to just, you're having stomach upset and all of these kinds of things. And people come to me later and they're like, I never made that connection. I never thought about how that was really happening and how the stress, that there's a whole conversation, a neurobiological conversation happening all the time that
Yeah.
I wasn't aware was being influenced by my environment or my workplace relationships. And so those are a lot of the things that I've had to kind of, peel back the curtain on for folks. And it seems to be eye opening.
Yeah. I love that sentiment you mentioned about scrolling through your phone for 30 minutes, right? It seems uh, so innocent, right? I even had an argument once with somebody who was in the health and fitness space about scrolling before bedtime. And there is so much research about how scrolling in bed right before you go to sleep is just not good for you. And this person was highly educated, and they still were arguing it because we don't always use logic when we when we argue our feelings, and they felt like it was a good way to de-stress and unwind and those types of things, and so that's their experience, and I'm not going to argue that. I kind of just graciously agreed to disagree in that
Right.
conversation. But it is a really good sign that, like, if you're trying to distract yourself from something, right? We all say we want to spend more time with our family, and yet we scroll for 30 minutes in our driveway. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What's happening to where we need some time? And don't get me wrong, I am no means perfect. I scrolled for 5 minutes yesterday. I just told my wife I need 5 minutes to myself, for myself, by myself.
Yeah.
and so, but we have to ask ourselves. We have to start to see those signs and those symptoms for what they are, because they're not going to slap us in the face. Or if they do slap us in the face with something like, a very serious illness, that might be too late,
Right.
or we might not want to get to that point. And so I think that that's a really good indicator that maybe something is happening. What would you say? So let's say that there's an individual out there who does not have the gracious ability to talk to you or myself or another coach or advisor, or they're not ready to yet. They don't think that they're there yet. Are there other things that you're seeing in your clients that let you know that some occupational wellness is probably missing in their lives? So I love that idea, like scrolling, the other physiological traits. Anything else?
It's certainly, we always know that, lack of sleep, right? And when
Mhm.
they're waking up at 3 a.m. every morning, that adrenaline dump, right? So the cortisol dump. So we're seeing different things like that where people start to have these light bulbs of something is physiologically manifesting in my body. Why? Why is it that my GI system doesn't work correctly anymore? Why is it that I can't sleep anymore? Why is it that I always feel this tension in my jaw and in my shoulders? Why is it when I try to take these deep diaphragmatic breaths that Mandolen tells me is going to expand my rib cage out like an umbrella, I don't feel like it goes all the way out there? And
Yeah.
why do I feel so scrunched up all the time? And I don't feel like I can get a good range of motion. Oh, that's because I've always been in a tense mode. Why is it
Mm,
when I'm in an uncomfortable conversation with maybe someone that I'm having to deliver bad news to, or someone who is delivering bad news to me, that I hunch over and protect my abdomen as if I'm preparing for a literal sucker punch. What are those types of things starting to tell me? If we can get people to start being curious about how their body is wearing their environment and responding to that environment, that their nervous system is constantly scanning it, that, certainly, Coach, I cannot tell you, I had this earlier in my career as well, people driving into work, breaking out in hives, getting really bad dizzy spells, high blood pressure, all of these kinds of things where certainly panic attacks. I mean, these just horrific things that you hear from people saying, I didn't realize that was work related. But they start to understand that it's only happening on the Sunday Scaries. It's only happening when they're getting done from work, when they feel safe again. Those are a good sign that something is not right at work.